Most people who think they're trading are actually gambling, and it has nothing to do with how smart they are, how hard they work, or how much they know about markets. It's structural. The difference between a trader and a gambler comes down to one thing: their relationship with probability. Not their indicators, not their conviction, not how often they're right. Let me show you what I mean. Start with what gambling actually is. Gambling, at its core, involves outcomes that are genuinely random by design. A roulette wheel doesn't care what happened on the last spin. A slot machine has no memory. The house sets the probability distribution. It's fixed, and no amount of analysis changes it. The best a gambler can do is understand those odds clearly and play accordingly. Markets are categorically different. They are not random. They are patterned expressions of the sentiment, psychology, and behavior of market participants, repeating in ways that can be studied, mapped, and understood. That's the entire premise of technical trading. That's the reason any of this is worth attempting at all. Think about it this way. If enough market participants believe a market is going up, they express that by buying it. That creates demand. Demand drives prices higher. The market goes up. It really is that simple. Markets move because people decide to buy or sell, and those decisions reflect how they feel about the future. The squiggly lines on your screen aren't the market. They're a record of what people did. And yet here's the deeper irony. Most traders, in practice, approach markets the same way they would approach something genuinely random, looking for signals that fire mechanically, hoping the next one pays out, adding more inputs when the current ones fail. The premise says the market has structure. The behavior says they don't really believe it. That mismatch is the core of the problem, and the data confirms it. Generally speaking, success comes down to facing the realities of trading honestly. So that's what I'm going to do here. Not to discourage you, but to give you an honest picture of where things stand. The most striking numbers don't come from academics. They come from regulators, the people who actually see all the trading accounts. India's securities regulator, SEBI, studied every retail trader in the country's futures and options market across 3 full years, 2022 through 2024. 93% lost money. Not in a bad year, across 3 years of complete data covering more than 11 million traders. Europe's securities regulator, ESMA, analyzed CFD trading across multiple EU jurisdictions and found that between 74 and 89% of retail accounts lose money, a range that reflects variation across different markets and brokers, but points in exactly one direction. The UK's financial regulator requires CFD brokers to print the loss rate for their customers on their marketing materials. The number they are required to disclose? 89%. And in Brazil, a peer-reviewed study tracked every person who started day trading the country's futures market, one of the top 3 derivatives exchanges in the world, between 2013 and 2015. 97% of those who persisted lost money, and the longer they traded, the worse it got. Among those who traded for a single day, about 3 in 10 finished ahead. By 51 to 100 days in, it was under 1 in 10. Past 300 days, it was 3%. The fraction turning a profit fell at every step. The researchers looked for any sign that experience helped, that the survivors were learning. They found none. Then they noted that this same pattern, fewer and fewer winners the longer people play, is what you find in gambling. At a roulette table, that's not a trader's curve, that's a gambler's curve. The longer you trade using the most common approaches, the worse the chance of success becomes. In any truly skill-based endeavor, time and effort typically move the needle. Here, they move it the wrong way. That is the opposite of what learning should produce. And yet people keep coming back to the same approaches. The human brain is hardwired to seek certainty, and a clear buy or sell signal delivers it in a way that a range of probable outcomes never quite does. We'll talk more about this later. A peer-reviewed academic study from Taiwan adds a 15-year view. Every trade on the exchange from 1992 through 2006 with no survivorship bias. More than 8 out of 10 traders lost money before considering fees. And once you account for fees and ask who could do it reliably, year after year, the number falls to less than 1%. 5 datasets, 3 continents. Virtually the same answer every time. You might wonder about the United States, the largest retail trading market in the world. The United States has, unfortunately, never released comparable data. Draw your own conclusions from this. These are not the numbers of a skill-based endeavor being practiced poorly. These are the numbers of a fundamentally flawed approach being practiced at scale. It's worth pausing on a comparison here. A Wall Street Journal investigation, working with researchers from the University of Michigan and the University of Connecticut, examined 2 years of tracked play by 18,000 loyalty card holders at a casino. 86.5% lost money. The same investigation looked at online gambling too, using data from a major European operator. 89% lost money there. That number should sound familiar. It's the same number the UK regulator requires CFD brokers to disclose. The approaches most traders are using aren't producing meaningfully different outcomes from a casino floor. Card games like poker are worth distinguishing here. Skilled poker players genuinely manage probability, reading incomplete information, weighing the likely scenarios, acting on the most probable outcome while staying prepared for the others. There are successful professional poker players for exactly this reason. That's a different category from slots or roulette, and it's worth saying so clearly. Card counting in blackjack takes this even further, and the casino's response to it tells you something important. It's not cheating or illegal, it's tracking the changing composition of the remaining deck to know where the probability currently sits. Casinos ban it because it works. The house doesn't mind you betting big, it doesn't mind you having a system. It minds you actually understanding the probability. The key distinction is that poker and blackjack probabilities evolve with every card dealt. New information changes what's most likely on every hand. That's structurally similar to how Elliot wave analysis works. The probability picture updates continuously as new market structure emerges. Games like slots and roulette don't work that way. The probability is fixed before you sit down, and nothing you observe changes it. The traders the data describes, the 89%, the 93%, the 97%, aren't the poker professionals or the card counters. They're behaving more like slot machine players, pulling the lever, hoping the next signal pays out, adding more inputs when it doesn't. That's not a reflection of the people using them. It's a reflection of what signal-based approaches are structurally capable of delivering. If you've been trading without finding the success you're looking for, the odds, quite literally, given what we just talked about, are that you've been operating from a flawed set of assumptions. It's a framework problem, and framework problems are solvable. The almost universal response to numbers like these is to look for a simpler answer, a better indicator, a cleaner signal, a system that finally makes it easy. But there's also another response, and it's just as common. Instead of looking for something better, people look for more. More markets to scan, more setups to find, more prop accounts, more shots at a winner. If your average trade loses money, which is exactly what those numbers say is happening for most traders, it doesn't matter how many markets you screen. Scanning 500 charts instead of 5 doesn't give you an edge you don't have. It gives you 500 chances to act on the absence and illusion of one. And reaching for more markets, more signals, more confirmation is the tell. It's the gambler's instinct dressed up as research. The gambler believes that more hands, more machines, more bets will eventually tip the math their way. It never does. The odds live in the structure of the game, not in how much you play. We'll see the same instinct again in the next episode, just wearing different clothes. Instead of more markets, it's more indicators. Same wish, same result. But trading is hard because markets are hard. The failure rate isn't a coincidence. It's the predictable outcome of approaching markets, which are genuinely complex and governed by probability, with tools that aren't equal to the task. If trading were easy, the numbers would look different. If you've already been using Elliott wave analysis, this might reframe something familiar. Elliott wave analysis feels difficult to many traders who are accustomed to indicators precisely because it doesn't flatten the complexity into a signal. It visually describes the full range of possibilities, which can be thought of as a probability distribution for where a market is likely to go. That's not a design flaw. That's what intellectual honesty looks like when applied to markets. The traders who succeed aren't the ones who found an easier answer. They're the ones who stopped looking for one. The research confirms that a small, identifiable group of traders does make money consistently. So what separates them from everyone else? They're the poker professionals of the trading world, not trying to predict a specific outcome, but working through the range of most likely outcomes from the current state of the market and acting on the most probable one while staying prepared for the others. It is not their indicators. It is not the number of markets they watch. It is not their entry timing or their charting platform or their news feed. It is their relationship with probability. A genuine trader does not need to know what a market is going to do. They need to understand the range of most likely outcomes from where things stand right now and make decisions consistently aligned with the most probable one while staying prepared for the others. In statistical terms, that means always asking, where is the probability distribution weighted most heavily and what would cause it to shift? Over a large enough number of trades, that approach produces results. Not on every trade, not even on most trades necessarily, but consistently enough over time that the edge compounds. The gambler's approach to trading is oriented toward prediction, a specific outcome, right or wrong, the next indicator that confirms the trade, the next signal that removes doubt, the next pattern that guarantees the outcome. And because no single outcome is ever guaranteed in markets, because the range of what can happen is always wider than any signal acknowledges, that search is perpetual and it never resolves. No trader is right on every market call. The goal is not to be right. The goal is to align your decisions with the statistically most likely outcomes, consistently, with a framework comprehensive enough to describe market behavior across every scenario. That distinction, probability management versus outcome prediction, is the line between trading and gambling. Recognizing the distinction is one thing. Building a framework that actually operationalizes it and makes it practical is another. That framework has to do three things. It has to continuously describe the current state of the market, not just at a single point in time, but as conditions evolve. It has to identify the high probability outcomes from that state, along with what would confirm or invalidate that assessment. And it has to give you a basis for managing positions that's grounded in probability, not hope. Think of it like a map that updates in real time as the terrain changes. Not a snapshot of where things were, but a living picture of where things are. This isn't a conclusion I reached from the outside. Early in my career, I spent several years at Tudor Investment Corp on a research team that built indicator-based algorithmic trading systems. A few of the people I worked alongside had been on the team behind Deep Thought, the first computer to beat a chess grandmaster. The tools we were using were cutting edge at the time. Most of them are commonplace now. And even with that, the talent, the resources, the rigor of a process built specifically to validate an edge, mining a reliable signal out of combining indicators was brutally hard work, and more often a failure than a success. That stayed with me. So when I came back to thinking seriously about trading years later, I didn't go hunting for a better indicator. I'd seen firsthand what it took to extract even a marginal edge from that approach, and I knew it wasn't the answer. I was looking for something structurally different. What I found at first wasn't a framework. It was a person. Someone posting Elliot wave forecasts publicly with a level of consistency and accuracy that was hard to dismiss. I started following the work. I joined a private trading room, and I watched the same thing happen, day after day, for months. That's what convinced me, not the theory, the evidence. The same way any honest assessment of a probabilistic framework should work. What I understood, once I was in it, was why it was different. Not because it promised certainty, it doesn't, but because it offered something genuinely rare. A comprehensive probabilistic framework for describing market behavior, grounded in the sentiment, psychology, and behavior of market participants, rather than in simple transformations of price data. Most traders inherently behave as if they're placing a bet on what the squiggly line on their screen is going to do next. Elliot wave analysts understand they're tracking the sentiment of the crowd and drawing rational conclusions about what crowds usually do next. Think about what it means to make a trading decision without knowing the range of most likely outcomes for the market you're looking at. It's a bit like being asked where a golfer's next drive will land without knowing he typically hits between 140 and 160 meters. You're making a decision. You just don't have what you'd need to make it a rational one. That's at the core of what the data we just looked at is describing. There's a certain irony in this worth noting. The emotional behavior that tends to drive those failure rates, the FOMO, the greed, the fear, is precisely what creates the crowd psychology patterns that Elliot wave analysis tracks. The majority are, in a sense, generating the signal that the minority reads. We'll come back to this later. Whether you're brand new to Elliot wave analysis or you've been counting waves for years, this is something useful to hold on to. At any point in time, a market can be described by some subset of Elliot wave patterns. That's not a prediction, it's a structural observation. That market movement reflects the evolving behavior of its participants, and that those patterns repeat in ways that are identifiable and tradable. Technical traders will recognize pieces of this already: support and resistance, market structure, momentum, Fibonacci levels, triangles, head and shoulders, the concepts and patterns you've seen 100 times. Elliot wave is the framework that brings them together under one roof, shows how they connect, and fills in what they leave out. That's the framework a probability-conscious trader needs. Unfortunately, as we've seen in the numbers, the vast majority of traders are not successful. It's worth asking yourself whether what you're doing is structurally different from what those numbers describe, or just a variation of the same approach. What you're doing as a trader isn't happening on your computer screen. It's happening out in the real world. And what's on your screen is just a reflection of that. The traders who understand this are the ones operating outside the crowd, not inside it. So the question I want to leave you with isn't whether you're a good trader or a bad one. It's more fundamental than that. Do you have a genuine probabilistic basis for the decisions you're making? Or are you operating on something that just feels like one? The answer might make you feel uncomfortable. That discomfort would be the beginning of something better. That's episode 2 of Reading the Crowd, Elliot Wave for the Modern Trader. In episode 3, we're going to get specific about what genuine probability-based thinking actually looks like in practice, and why the most popular approaches to finding an edge, including the instinct that more indicators mean better odds, fail to deliver it, mathematically and structurally. See you there, and as always, happy trading.